I must say I'm really excited for this webinar specifically, as we have 3 people who are experts and are actively using AI with the good and bad. I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation today. So I'll go over in the order I see the panelists in the upper part. So Dr. Williamson, if you can introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. My name's Eric Williamson. I'm a cardiovascular radiologist at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and I'm our enterprise chair of radiology informatics.
Dr. Morton, please.
Thank you for having me. I am a neuroradiologist at Carle Health in Urbana, Illinois, and I also head the clinical informatics team.
And Dr. Wendt?
Yeah, my name is Gary Wendt. I'm a neuroradiologist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm also vice chair of informatics and enterprise director of medical imaging.
Thank you very much. So let's dive into the discussion. I'll start with you, Dr. Williamson, if that's okay. With Mayo being such a unique organization, you're a big enterprise, many unique workflows. What were you looking for when selecting an AI solution?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think the problems, the issues that face us are pretty similar to a lot of large organizations. We have hundreds of subspecialty trained radiologists scattered across, 8 or 10 different sites, reading off of dozens of different work lists, across, 4 states and 3 different time zones. We needed a flexible solution. Right? Not the same interaction is going to work for one of our smaller sites that has maybe 2 to 5 radiologists versus one of our larger sites, which has over 100 radiologists. The specific solutions that we needed are not going to be the same for each one of those radiologists. So we needed a flexible solution that could be individually deployed and then architected according to the needs of that individual site. And I think we have that. As you know, we are still in progress of developing how those workflows are going to go and how we're going to handle all the information that's now available to us. But that has been probably our number one thing, was that we needed flexible implementation of AI solutions. One thing I did mention, probably as an example of that kind of flexibility of configuration, we initially, with our latest deployment, had alerts going to a large group of people who maybe were not the appropriate group to get the alerts. So for instance, a radiologist working in Rochester might be getting an alert from a case that was performed in Wisconsin with very little background of who the people were who were ordering it or where the results should really go. And our ability to identify those concerns in sort of a pre-production environment, be able to make configuration changes very quickly and adapt those solutions it was just key to having to an organization like ours, as you mentioned, that is not just large, but spread out across a broad region.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific insight. It ties into this this question, people ask about the AI market. Is it more a product off the shelf? So can you just buy AI and just, play around? Or is it something that is more, you mentioned the enterprise, that needs customization, needs tailoring, need adjusting to the workflow? And I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it is more the latter. And also, I think that's what's exciting about AI right now, is that we don't have all the questions answered yet. So a lot of it is iteration and changing workflows, and even small things can make a massive difference. You mentioned getting the wrong alerts, obviously, but I think all of those,
Yeah, it's been, honestly, it's been a lot of fun, right? These are questions that we need to be answering, not just for us, but, and Gary and Doug are going to tell you the same thing. It's not just our practices. It's not just radiology. It's medicine as a whole, right? These are questions that we're going to have to be able to answer. And it's fun to be involved, honestly. And I think as you mentioned, we do not have all the answers yet, but we're beginning to develop our ability to answer those questions. So.
For sure. Dr. Wendt, I think you have a very interesting experience because you implemented a lot of different AI solutions, different spaces. So if you could share with us some of the best practices around the integration of AI into the workflow, and what was your specific approach in making AI implementation a success?
Well, as opposed to the Mayo environment, we're sort of a little unique in that we actually serve the University of Wisconsin group of radiologists, and our UW PACS system actually serves 7 different organizations throughout the state. And we read everything from rural access, critical care, rural hospitals, all the way up through tertiary medical centers. And as opposed to the Mayo environment, we actually read everything. So as a neuroradiologist, I may be reading a head CT on somebody from a critical access hospital. And then the next one, I'm reading an MR from somebody that's had 15, prior MRs. And we have a single PACS, a single PowerScribe, a voice recognition system, but 7 different EMRs. So it was really critical for us that an AI solution would actually work across the board. We couldn't have something that was EMR dependent or, and the one thing is that Dr. Williamson brought up, it had to be configurable in that, pulmonary guy isn't going to want to be seeing all of the brain bleeds and the C-spine fractures. On the other hand, as a neuroradiologist, I sort of want that catch the edge of the film PE algorithm firing for me, because there's a lot of times I do a stroke deluxe and a chest radiologist is never going to look at that, but we catch a lot of heart and lung. And, I'm not a cardiothoracic radiologist, so I'm not searching for PEs every day. So it's nice to have something that sort of works as, sort of a overview, somebody looking over my shoulder, tapping me on the shoulder saying, hey, you better take a look here. Because then even if I don't know, I can actually always, ping one of my subspecialty people in cardiothoracic and say, what do you think? So I think that was the big thing in AI, is getting something that worked across the board in multiple environments. So it's, it's critical. And we implemented the Aidoc solution, I think from when we spun up the VM to when we had it live was about 3 hours. And we actually caught a subdural that was missed within the first hour and a half before it was even sending back to PACS. And we made a phone call and managed to get an outpatient admitted and taken care of. So I think that's about the best implementation time I've ever seen.
Thank you, Dr. Wendt. And I think that it's funny, there are so many insights, so many thoughts running in my head, but I think one big thing that I hear is that apart from flexibility, robustness is also key, right? So you want to make sure that, yes, on the one hand, you can tailor it, but you want to make sure that it still works in a very diverse environment. And it seems like you're also talking about implementation, integration time. You don't want to have the, big hassle or a big lift to kind of try it out. You want to get it up and running quickly.
Yeah, because I mean, if it's a 2-year project, it's painful. Nobody likes to sit in meetings with IS.
Well, I don't. Public webinar, everybody then likes to see meeting with IS. No, but I agree. I think that it's crucial because I can share that on our end, the biggest objection point we have, we hear like from radiologists, oh, I really want to try this out, but IT overburdened, so much to do, and getting it, short and easy to get started, I think is really key.
Yeah, it's actually critical. And, I shouldn't pick on IS or IT people, because I'm a neuroradiologist, but I actually spend 60% of my time doing IT and only 40% of my time doing MD work.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're an IS people, actually.
Yes. Yeah, I was an IT person before I actually even went to medical school. I grew up as an electrical and computer engineer and worked for the computer science department at the UW, and then got bored and went to medical school.
And now you're going kind of halfway back.
Yeah, well, over 50% of the way back.
Okay, yes. Terrific. Thank you, Dr. Wendt. Dr. Morton, I'd love to hear your perspective, a bit of a different setting. What I'd like to ask you is a bit on the expectation as an active user. What were the expectation when you started using AI, and were they met when it hit the real world?
Sure. Well, we are a integrated health system. We have a main hospital that does comprehensive stroke care. We have a level 1 trauma center. Plus, we serve a number of critical access and smaller community hospitals in the region. We provide radiology services for all of these groups. And just to make the mix a little more complex, there are actually 3 different radiology groups reading using the same equipment at these various hospitals. So we needed a system that, number one, was going to triage some of these unread studies. You know, you're always afraid when you open up that CT and you find a pulmonary embolism or you find a head bleed in an outpatient. You want to make sure you're on top of those. And so we really wanted to make sure that we could get those studies read quickly. We also wanted to make sure that the alerts weren't going inappropriately to the wrong radiology group. We were actually looking for a way. One of my radiologists actually looked me right in the face and said, if I have to do one more cursor click, there will be a revolt. And so we wanted to install and build a system that did not significantly affect the radiologist's workflow. What we found was, number one, this software is just uncanny in how accurate it is. I remember the first time we found a PE that somebody had missed, and we were of course able to take care of that very quickly. It wasn't quite within the hour of the University of Wisconsin's experience, but it was pretty close. And people began to really respect this software and how well it performed. We are almost to the point of having our non-alert system in place. It's up in our test system right now, where we will hopefully be bringing this into production in the next month or so. Our expectations have been very much met on this. This system has worked out very well for us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morton. And what I hear is that seems like two big questions for you, or one on the clinical side: is this bringing value? Is this accurate? Can it make sense and provide a valuable impact? And the other is on the workflow side: no button clicks, be there when I need it, just figure out what I want when I want it, and just make sure I get the information.
Yes, and we've been able to accomplish all of that.
I love those insights. I'll share a story. When we were in the early days of Aidoc, we had a conversation with a neuroradiologist, and told us about the workflow and how many button clicks, and we asked about CAD or AI and why they're using. He said, yes, you wanna minimize the number of button clicks you have. So we kind of said, okay, got it, we'll do one. He said, no, didn't get me. Minimize. You don't get one, you get 0. And then we understood, okay, so this is the task we had ahead of us. Dr. Williamson, going back to you, I want to talk about another aspect of implementation, which is change management or stakeholder management. So following your experience after selecting the AI solutions, you managed to group everyone on your team and make decisions in an agile manner. So if you can share some of the early takeaways and recommended adjustments from that perspective.
Yeah, Elad, you make another good point, and this is a really good question. I think we did do a nice job with regard to designing our team, our implementation team, to be agile, right? That was one of the things that we really wanted, was when there were issues with the software, when there were issues that that might come up that would be related to a particular implementation, or if there were any kind of hiccups, right? This is the first time we'd done anything quite like this. And so we wanted to be able to make decisions quickly and identify what the issues were and reach out appropriately. I think agile we did okay. Where I failed was in communication. right? And I guess if there was a particular takeaway from again, we're a little newer at this game than, for instance, Gary is at his practice, but when it comes to our implementation, the advice that I would give people is over communicate, right? When we struggled, it was because I had not reached out to all of the different stakeholders and I didn't have everybody on the same page, right? That was really that was a struggle, because a small team is agile, right? But the problem is, as you implement AI solutions, right, there will be many people who will have strong feelings about what they ought to see and how they ought to see it. And your gentleman who had the 0-click requirement, I mean, there are many people who have a stake in the way that these tools are implemented into practice. And you need to be able to hear all those voices. You need to make sure that people feel comfortable with the solutions as you roll them out. You need to make sure people have the appropriate training which reaches them where they need it to be. And I am confident that I have not made my last mistake with regard to these implementations, but I will say that in the future, I'm going to try to do a better job with the communication piece. I think this represents, AI in general represents such a change, right, in what we're doing as radiologists, but then also as physicians. And I think this is our ability to make sure that every voice is heard, or every voice that we can hear is heard. Decisions need to be made, and our team was very good at making decisions, and we're going to work on the communication going forward. So,
yeah, that's a really interesting point. And talking very practically, did you also communicate outside of radiology, or most communications focused within?
This is a great, and I'd be very interested in hearing from Doug and Gary on this subject as well. We have largely confined our communication internal within the radiologists and among the radiologists. We've thought a little bit about what sort of reporting documentation might be necessary. Does it, when Gary reads a head CT and he's detected an intracranial hemorrhage, is it his responsibility to tell that critical access hospital, oh, and by the way, I'm running AI in the background, and that's what helped me? To this point, we've said that with regard to documentation of what solutions are used, we're going to confine ourselves to when there are regulatory requirements, right, or there's some sort of billing ramification. But it's so much, again, as we move into a post-AI world, for medicine, all types of medicine, it's going to be difficult for us to keep track of all the different tools that we use. So the way that we're thinking of Aidoc in this case, but a number of AI-related solutions, is that this is another tool that is augmenting what we do for patients. And so the individual documentation, we're going to try to confine it to those situations.
Very interesting. Dr. Wendt, Dr. Morton, anything to add on that point?
No, I actually agree with exactly what he said, is that we have kept everything internal to radiology. There is one tool that we have that we've expanded into the neurointerventional, the endovascular, and into the stroke service. But even that is only a small portion of the tool. They've just sort of gotten a little mobile app access, but they still don't understand the entire workflow. The big thing is I think we've seen that, if you start trying to over communicate, it just confuses everyone, because if you don't really understand the full workflow, from basically when the patient gets on the table all the way to where the images land in your lap to read and you generate a report. And, if you don't understand that, it's just sort of largely a black box. Physicians outside of radiology are used to clicking on their CT Stroke Deluxe, and, an hour or so later, they get a phone call or a report, and they're perfectly happy with that black box. So, and I mean, in order to keep stuff agile, I mean, like our implementation team was 2 people, me and one of my med physics friends, because I have administrative access to PACS and to PowerScribe and to our HL7 interface engine, and I'm a certified Cloverleaf HL7 interface programmer.
Nice.
So I can basically do whatever I want, But interestingly enough, about an hour after we got the thing first running, my chairman walked by the front window of my office, and we were sort of grinning. Me and the med physics person were sort of grinning at each other, and he came walking around and came into my office and said, "What did you guys just do that we're not going to see?" and we were sort of greedy. I deployed it in the neuro group first, and my chairman is like, "Well, it can detect pulmonary embolisms, and I'm a cardiovascular radiologist." He goes, why do you get all the cool tools and why don't I?" And I'm like, guess we should have told some more people. So we did very rapidly roll it out to the entire department. It was one of those things that the second people heard about it, the question was, why don't I have it turned on?
That's a very interesting implementation story.
Yeah. Normally we see tools that you start working on implementing and people are, all hesitant and digging their heels in and not wanting to change. And this was one of those things where people, I've never gotten an email that said, "Could you please disable this tool? I don't like it." Whereas there's a lot of other stuff that we implement that, that we see we have to drag people kicking and screaming to. So.
Thank you. So to Morton, anything to add on that, or?
Well, I would agree with what was said, that we don't communicate outside of radiology about the artificial intelligence tools. We did have an interesting development that our neurointerventionalists got wind of this, and the fact that the LVO, the large vessel occlusion tool, will be coming online soon, and they started demanding access to the AI tools. So this is going to spread outside of radiology, I think, pretty quickly. But we basically keep it internal as much as we can.
Yeah, I think on our end, I would share that it's something that we do hear from time to time. We are very much radiology focused. I would say our roots are in radiology. And I think one of the interesting things we're working on is how to develop this potentially broader communication while keeping radiology firmly driving the communication, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Dr. Wendt, I'll get back to you. Let's talk a bit about outcomes. So can you share what is the most valuable, or what are some of the outcomes you've been seeing from utilizing artificial intelligence?
Well, I think one of the big things we've really liked on the outcomes is just making us more efficient as radiologists. I'm sure everybody on this webinar remembers the sort of offhanded comment by some individual that radiologists were like the coyote running over the edge of the cliff. And that's sort of since been redacted. And I think that's one of the fears that everybody initially had about AI. I'm hoping people are getting over it, because it couldn't be further from the truth. It is not a replacement for a radiologist. It's a way to make you do your job better, more efficiently, and more confidently. Like I said, I always go back to the, if I open up a head MR, I'm probably looking for 4,000 things. AI is good at doing one thing. You train it for one problem and it's good at doing that. You train it for another problem, it's good at doing that. So what are we going to do? Develop 4,000 AI algorithms and run 4,000 AI algorithms on every head MR we do? I think we'd probably have to have several data centers full of GPUs running 24 hours a day. So I think that's the biggest thing. I think the biggest outcome, or the biggest positive I've seen with AI, is just the fact that it enables me to do my job better and more efficiently.
Terrific. So the big winners of the AI race would be Google and Amazon with and NVIDIA for the GPUs.
Yeah, we actually just put our second DGX supercomputer in, and it draws more power than a commercial data center can supply to a single rack. We actually are having they have to actually put new power in to generate the 6,300 watt requirement of one little 8U box.
Unbelievable.
And they're not giving us any rebates for heating their space.
Dr. Morton, I think it was raised a bit, but I'd love to get your perspective on this. But how AI was received internally? How did the radiologists respond? I may be tied to what Dr. Wendt said about the fear of replacement. Anything you can share?
Sure. Overall, it was very positive. There was some angst at first. People were worried that somehow AI was going to replace them, and that this was just the beginning of the end. But I think people have become very positive, very comfortable with the idea that these are not going to replace anybody. These tools augment what radiologists can do. They help us do our jobs better. They actually can cut down the interruptions and actually decrease the stress quite a bit, I think. So these tools have been very helpful in that regard. And as we've all alluded to, these tools have found misses that people have made, so it's actually improved the quality of care, and it gives our radiologists much more confidence that they're doing the right thing, that they're not missing stuff, that they're not going to hurt anybody. Also, the other thing that these tools have done is it's helped us to start building a new QC process. We'll actually go through the Aidoc alerts now each day and see how the reports compare to what the Aidoc tool does. And granted, there are going to be false positives, but it is important to understand that this is another way to look at the work that's being done, the quality of the work that's being done, and to help the radiologist do a better job.
Terrific. I think it's very interesting that, first of all, that change management, and this is why one of the things that we put an emphasis on is that initial rollout has to be, you have to start, I don't know if with a bang is the right word, but positively. You want to make sure that you start well, because what we find is that if there is any hiccup or major hiccups at the beginning, it's very hard to earn back the trust. And Dr. Morton, what you mentioned about reviewing alerts, I think it's all about trust, right? At some point in time, we just said, okay, we trust the AI solution. We realize we trust the workflow, we trust the accuracy. I think that's super key. And one thing that we really focus on is about, building and maintaining that trust.
Sure. The other thing I'd suggest is start small. We started out, I think, with the subdural module and the PE module, and later we started adding other things. And people, they say, "Oh, great! We have a new module now. We're looking for new stuff," and it's received much more positively once that trust has been established.
Very good point. So I'll go back to Dr. Williamson. Maybe more of a high level question. Any thoughts, plans, or expectations from AI, either from within your department or in general for 2021?
Yeah, this is a great question. This is something we talk about a lot, right? And certainly people with more experience and much smarter than I am in this space. But speaking for our own institution, again, and what we've done so far, I'm really pleased. I'm honestly really proud of the people on our team and all the work they've done. But I am by no means satisfied at this point, right? To this point, what we have largely done is taken algorithms that look at an image, right? Look at the pixels, look at the voxels, and evaluate and identify issues. But as we move forward, as algorithms become more sophisticated, as your company becomes more sophisticated, as Gary and Doug and their scientists develop additional functionality, we'll begin to move beyond just image analysis, right? And we'll begin to incorporate the images that we see in the radiology information in with the larger longitudinal medical record, and we'll interface with maybe, I don't know, genetic testing and additional background in individual patient history, and maybe even wearable devices, et cetera. We'll begin to integrate the work that's being done on images into the larger patient record. And at that point, we'll start to make really powerful changes in the way that medicine is done, and will become, again, to Gary's point as well, the impact, this will not replace us. This will make radiologists more important to the practice of medicine overall. And as we begin to integrate these things, we'll have new questions and new issues and new challenges. And I really look forward to that. That's where I think we're scratching the surface, right? We've plucked the low-hanging fruit at this point, and the real advantages, real advances that are coming are still before us. And it's just exciting to be involved kind of in the early days.
Yeah, and I'll add that we talked about this, but the iteration in the early days, our CNA has just been, a couple of weeks ago. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And one reason is that we got so much feedback, and you kind of think, okay, we've been commercial for 2 years, we've iterated, solved that, but you get all sorts of new ideas. And I think it's because once you hit the real world, you do one step and then, okay, more questions arise or more suggestions, and then like you iterate once again. And I think like the curve for AI is still in a very, very steep slope. We're not anywhere near the tapering off, at least in my opinion.
Well, and I think, you look at the work that your company's done. As you mentioned, you've been around for a while, right? We've certainly been talking to you for a while, as Doug and Gary have as well. And you look at kind of what we're doing, but you're exactly right. It's as we begin to iterate, right? As we begin to see the potential of this technology and how it can be integrated, things will take off at this point. And I think you make a really good point. It's not until you get this into clinical practice, as long as it's sitting in somebody's lab, right? Then, there's lots of things that we talk about. When it goes into clinical practice, right? That's when you really get, people's eyes opening and starting to think about, well, that's cool that you do this, but wouldn't it be cool if you could also then do, and that's, the idea is just multiply at that point. So it's exciting.
Yeah. Dr. Wendt, anything to comment? Same question, high level thoughts.
No, I mean, I think it by far is, we're still on the very far end of the curve. It's like we haven't even started up the slope. And we currently have like 5 of our own internally developed AI algorithms that we've trained, validated. I mean, looked at like 10, 20, 30,000 studies to validate. And we want to actually put those online. And so when I went to get our first GPU supercomputer, I talked to my chairman and he's like, well, why do we need it? And I'm like, I brought him over to the med physics area and showed him a computer sitting under a scientist's desk that, had the tin snips and the drill and bolted a custom power supply in and had like 3 GPU cards sort of hanging out the edge, and the CD holder was open with a coffee cup on it, keeping his coffee boiling. And I said, okay, if we develop an algorithm, do you want it running on this? If somebody pulls in that coffee cup holder and spills the coffee all over the GPU, it's not going to be running. I said, do you think we can support that 24/7? So we got approved to get a GPU supercomputer, and I thought it would be good for a year or more. And we're not even to a year, and we were 100% utilized 24/7. And actually went back to them and purchased our third generation GPU supercomputer. And so we're actually talking about having to limit the researchers' time on it, because we want to be able to have dedicated clinical resources, to be able to process stuff real time. So I think that's going to be the big thing in the future, is to be able to get stuff out of the lab and get stuff into the hands of the clinicians. Because, if you do something in the lab in the back end and nobody ever sees it, that doesn't help patient care a bit.
Right.
So
I love that point. I think it's exactly right. And some of the challenges, I think there are a few here. One of it is how do you integrate things into workflow at scale? Another big challenge I think that will rise up then is consolidation of AI results. What happens if you have 10 algorithms running on, a head CT? How do you make sure you don't see, 10x the amount of false positives? which would make it really hard to use. So I agree. I think fascinating questions about scalability of AI workflow. 100% agree. Dr. Morton, anything to share on that?
Well, I'd like to share my laundry list of what I've bugged AI companies to create. First would be AI-assisted hanging protocols for a PACS system, where it doesn't rely on a series descriptor. It looks at the images and said, this is the one he wants here on this part of the screen. Second thing is natural language processing for record synopsis, but also for report checking, looking for right-left errors, looking for something important in the report that maybe should be in the impression and it's not, things like that. AI for help in migration, if you're migrating data from another institution, matching up different kinds of studies, et cetera. AI help in the QC process, which we're starting to use your tool for that. Also, neurointerventionalists are really interested in what we're doing and are interested in getting rapid communication on that. And then finally, for clinicians, clinical decision support software is a nightmare for those guys. Most of the time they have to lie to get what they want, to get the test ordered that they want. And having an AI tool in there that would help them say, hey, this is maybe what you want to think about, and have it actually be helpful to them, I think would be just tremendous. So those are a few of the things I'm looking for. Now, short term for us, it's basically we're looking at getting the neurointerventionalists on board, and also the QC process to help us verify that we're not missing stuff in our reports using the AI tools is where we're going.
I love that it's so practical. I think this is exactly the power of getting started and iterating. I think well, I can't comment out of confidentiality on many of the things you mentioned.
Yeah, I understand.
Although you probably know much of what we're gonna do, but regarding and obviously the second point, I think we're tightly working on that. But I think it's exactly that. Once you start iterating, it goes back to the same point. You have so many practical ideas that can be implemented tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Terrific. Any more comments? Yeah, see Dr. Williamson.
Well, no, I just was going to say I want Doug's decision support. As soon as you guys develop that, we want that as well. This is a big deal, right? And again, as we mentioned before, it goes well beyond interpreting pixels, right? There's going to be so much that we can do with regard to workflows, and we are going to have to manage the button clicks, right? When there are, and you mentioned, what happens when there are 10 algorithms running on a NeuroMR. Yeah, but what about when you get to Gary's, 4,000 algorithms? I do not want to click through all of them, and as you mentioned, even if 1% of them show a false positive, geez, that's a lot to deal with. So yeah, the scalability is it's nice that you guys are thinking about that, because it's a big deal. It's going to be a big deal for all of us.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the other thing I think that AI will be able to start doing is actually consuming a large amount, consuming more data than a radiologist can consume, and consolidating it down and looking at stuff like even the raw data. I'm not going to be able to log onto a scanner and make sense out of a case-based map or look at a convolution kernel from a CT. But AI doesn't really care what you hand it. We've actually had people, one of the big things now is PET-MR, but with PET-MR, you need the CT attenuation correction done. So you have to bring a patient to another scanner and scan with that. And our scientists have been able to actually generate synthetic CT images off of the MR data. So we don't have to actually go and CT a patient. But it's, that's sort of the cool stuff that I think it will enable us to present data from, filter it down and present it to the radiologist. So again, we can do our job better.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, please.
Go ahead. Oh, I was going to say, I think there are some foundational things that have to be done within the EMR if we're going to get AI widely installed and working. Things like standardizing an anatomic dictionary, standardizing how metadata is defined and stored for various images and reports and things. These are all foundational things that are going to have to go in to help the AI be successful as it's deployed across the medical enterprise.
100%. And one thing that I'm thinking about in all of this, we're talking about the potential fear of replacement, but I think this is exactly right. If you combine more data, EMR data, and imaging data that you can't access right now, actually providing more value that radiology can bring, right? Because now you can provide more services based on that AI plus human interpretation of new patterns that weren't available before. So in that sense, I actually think that if anything, AI would enable more work or more value driven from radiology.
But I still think the comment about the EMRs being more intelligent and be a better catcher and processor, because there's a lot of stuff that I see and there's algorithms we've developed. I mean, like, even if I'm doing, a T-spine or a C-spine CT or a stroke deluxe, I often catch the heart. And, if I see somebody that has a really heavy vascular calcium load, I make a comment on that in my report. And, so the bottom line is that is a tremendous risk indicator. But I would bet that probably less than 5% of those cases actually get acted on. It would really be nice if that was a structured element that went right into the report. And when the patient came in to see their primary care provider, it fired a best practice alert that said, this patient has an exceptionally high vascular calcium load. You really need to do a full cardiovascular risk assessment workup. The same with visceral fat. And, it's, if somebody has a really high visceral fat load, it's a tremendous risk indicator. I know one of our staff people has actually done research on that and shown it to be far better than the Framingham risk stratification. It outperforms it by, a huge amount. So, but the bottom line is we can comment on it, but since the EMR doesn't really take structured elements out of our reports, it probably very rarely gets acted on.
Yeah. So I see we have about 10 minutes. So I wanted to see if we can answer a few questions. I see there are a bunch. Ariella, I'm linking to you to lead the...
Yes, thank you. So first of all, thank you all. I found this very interesting, and I really enjoyed also the dynamics between the three of you. Thank you so much. So I'm gonna start sort of more general, and then if we have time, we're gonna go into some very specific questions that were asked about Aidoc and our abilities. I'm gonna answer those offline. But one of the questions that has come up, and we discuss this a lot, is what are the metrics that are shown to the impact of these tools to a payer in an at-risk value model? So what are the patient outcomes and the cost impact? So has anyone measured this? So maybe Elad, I'll let you start, and then maybe if anyone else on the panel wants to jump into that.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I've actually been this week, a couple of days ago, I presented at CMS for our one of our PE products for an NTIP publication, and then the whole discussion becomes around outcomes. It's not necessarily the at-risk model, but definitely what payers care about, and what we find is typically things they care about are high-level outcomes, things like length of stay as an inpatient or in the emergency department. Obviously, mortality, if you can show impact of that. Any type of outcome measure, for example, in stroke or bleed patients, you have MRS scores that you want to show reduction. So anything on the outcome side, have they been measured? I know some of our partners that did research about the outcome of AI showing, for example, length of stay reduction or AD length of stay reduction. But I know that there is a lot more work to do now that the technology is more widely used. But I'm more than happy if any of the panelists have any thoughts on that.
Well, I think this is a really good point, right? Because there are naive statistics, right? There are very simple statistics that we can run, and we can, Doug and Gary have the same experience that we do, where we can look at what, if you run this algorithm, let's say we go back to 2018 and run, for instance, the PE algorithm on all the PE studies that we did during that time, compare it to the individual reports, we can start to get at things like, well, what was the original radiologist's negative predictive value to positive predictive value? We can, again, these are what I would consider to be bland statistics, and they're fine to run. Those are helpful things to know, but you're hitting on the important point. Did the ability of the algorithm to find, say, 6 subsegmental pulmonary emboli in asymptomatic patients, was there an outcome benefit to those patients? It's the outcomes that are really going to drive, kind of where we go next and what's done. And it's going to require large volumes, right? That for us to really dive down on, what were the outcomes. So Gary and Doug are going to have to work together and then share their data with me when they're done with that. But those are studies, right? We're going to need big studies. We're going to need multiple sites to do that kind of work. And it's beyond the simple stuff that we're going to be able to do, each one of us at our own institution. So,
any more comments from the panelists?
There's actually an interesting question here. There were a lot of questions about replacement. I think we addressed that, but there are questions that have come up about the complacency and relying too much on AI. I'm interested to hear your thoughts, I guess, as the panelists. Maybe you just jump in first. Anyone who wants to take that, just to give your opinion on that.
I don't think it's been used. I initially, when we did turn it on, I turned it only on for the neuroradiology faculty, and I didn't turn it on for the fellows and residents, just because I was worried about will they just look at that and blow off a study as normal. And in fact, we've actually seen, they'd still take the same amount of time going through an exam. We've not seen that the residents, since we've started giving it to the residents and the fellows, they've not been able to basically increase their volume. I mean, if there really would have been a difference, we would have expected them to all of a sudden see a bump in their volumes, and that hasn't occurred. The one thing that the residents really like it for is when they're the single one, when they're the one pair of eyes that are looking at stuff at 2 a.m, they like the ability to bubble stuff to the top so that they can address the positives quicker than the negatives. So it keeps it gets the people that are having real critical problems into treatment quicker, and allows them to bubble other stuff down their list. So, but like I said, it hasn't just all of a sudden made somebody be able to increase their volume by a factor of 2.
I have not seen any real change in people becoming dependent on the software. Now, maybe we just haven't used it long enough. Maybe in 2 or 3 years, we might see a trend like that. But generally, people are interested in what the software is saying, and they compare their own thoughts to what the software is saying. But I've not seen anybody just rely on the software and sort of forego their ability to look at the images themselves.
So one thing we've worried about is not so much, Doug, somebody who's established in practice like you are, but how do you continue to train first-year residents? Right? How do you train? Right? How do you train them to have the same level of detail when looking for an intracranial hemorrhage that you guys have developed over years of experience, and potentially bad outcomes based on a miss? How do we continue to put that in front of residents and make sure that they have that same kind of level of intensity with regard to their job as opposed to. So I think the complacency question still exists. I have to agree with both of you. We haven't seen that yet, but it's something that we worry about in specifically in the educational arena.
Beauty of working at a private practice hospital. I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, well, but that is true. I mean, we have given people the option. People can actually fire the linking, they can either have it auto link, auto synchronize right when they open a study, or they can actually just have it as a right click or a toolbar option. So if there are a couple of the people, I think right now the majority of people all have went to the auto linking. Early on, we had several people that said, no, don't show me right away. I want to look at it, and I don't mind one mouse click. So we give people both options. We don't force them into one or the other.
Generally, we've got the auto display up on ours, and it beeps when it has a finding. So I don't even notice it unless it beeps. So, and that's the way most people use it here.
Thank you, guys. Just going to dive into, it's a bit of, I think it is a less large industry type of question, but I think it could be interesting. There was a question saying that recent publications describe that several of the detected cases are actually follow-ups, and then they're asking specifically, I guess, Elad, maybe you can start, how are we or the institution mitigating this, and is Aidoc incorporating future ability to compare exams to prior, to call attention to appropriate exams? So maybe you'd like to sort of approach that. It's a bit of a technical question, I know, but that could be interesting to the audience.
Yeah, I think the most interesting part in this is that we learned over time is that it's not just about false positive. We call it false relevant. I don't know the right term, but you can sometimes notify on a case that nobody cares about. And that is a problem if the prevalence is high enough. And we've actually had a lot of discussions internally. How do we solve such an issue? And I think one such an example is follow-up for brain bleeds. We also have, for example, post-operative free air. So free air isn't interesting if it's, or less interesting after operation. In some cases, and we found from market feedback, you have two approaches. One of them is, I don't want to take the risk of missing that new brain bleed, even if it's for a follow-up exam or an increased size. So alert me either way. And you have the other category of saying, no, I want the higher relevance option. So we are in a public forum, so I won't give too much about how we solve it, but we are actually releasing a feature exactly on that this quarter. And hopefully we'll be continuing to increase that. I would say it's something that is very top of mind for us because it is an important consideration. So basically, the solution is that doesn't matter how it looks for the user. It's basically incorporating that information to allow for, to give the user more information when we notify on a case.
So Elad, I don't want you to put you in a tough spot and ask you a question you can't answer, but let me phrase it therefore as a statement. It might be helpful for us to be able to have to be able to dial in. Do you know what I mean? The kind of the alert function. So if you see, this, I know this is a follow-up bleed. It was there yesterday. It's going to be there tomorrow. It's in the process of evolution. We're not going to give you an alert. If it were possible for, Gary does want to still get the alert, but Doug doesn't care quite so much, kind of thing. That would be a helpful feature. I'm not trying to read your face and figure out whether that's part of it or not, but.
Yes.
I'll let you, Elad, we've got 2 minutes. So I just want to be able to say thank you to everyone, and let's say just parting thoughts. So Elad, do you want to say anything more on that topic, or do I let everyone just say parting thoughts and then we say goodbye? I just want to be conscious of everyone's time, and we have 1 minute and 30 seconds left for the hour. So any parting thoughts from our terrific panelists?
I'll just take 15 seconds of your minute and a half. Thanks for having us. There you go, 30 seconds. But this has been great. This has been a great webinar. It's nice to get to talk to other people who are really invested in this space. These are early days. There's obviously lots more to come, and we'll look forward to it with anticipation.
Thank you, Dr. Williamson.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think it's, like I said, it's a very interesting time. It's, something that a year ago we were just thinking, it was interesting to have stuff chewing on for our scientists. And now, we've actually rolled it out and it's impacting clinical care. I think that's been the biggest positive that I've seen come out of all this is the fact that, you know, I'm not like a hardcore med physics, you know, I don't like, you know, figuring out how to scan rat brains and do stuff like that. You know, if somebody comes to me with a project, my sort of question is number one, does it reduce our cost of providing care? Does it enable us to improve the patient care? And does it improve our ability to do our job? And if the answer isn't positive to one of those, the project sort of goes, you know, gets put off for me. So I'm very much clinically focused, and I'm actually very glad to see that AI is no longer in the, you know, tin snips and bolting in power supplies under a desk. I'm glad to see that it's something that we're actually using to improve patient care and improve the quality of care, of, you know, speed, improve my life in general as a physician.
Well, you haven't seen our offices. It is just a bunch of computer with GPUs on the side. So, joking.
Very good.
Yeah.
I would just add that I agree with both of you. This has a tremendous potential to improve the quality of care and reduce the stress of the physicians. And I think that's going to be a great future.
Thank you, everybody. I want to be respectful of our listeners' time as well. So this was really enjoyable and really insightful. I learned a lot. Hope the listeners as well. And I wish you all a great holiday.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our three panelists and for everyone for listening. A recording will be sent and I'll try and address all the questions offline. Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a great new year.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Yep. Take care, you guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.